Hey, I'm Aisha. You can now watch UCF TV 24 hours a day on Bright House Digital Channel 1.
Hello and welcome to the Global Perspective Show. I'm John Bercia. Our guest today is Kevin Bales, the president and co-founder of the Free the Slaves organization and one of the leading abolitionists in the world today. Welcome, Kevin Bales.
John, it's great to be here.
Thank you. Tell us a little bit about the slavery and human trafficking problem. Most people are surprised to hear that it's something that afflicts the world in the 21st century.
I have to say I was surprised myself when I first found out about this issue in the 1990s. I was a little dubious. I picked up a leaflet that said there are millions of slaves in the world today, and I thought, how on earth did they count that, and how can that possibly be true? But it was in fact that leaflet that drove my curiosity and made me want to dig as a social scientist and find out some of the answers to the implicit questions there. What I discovered was that in fact there's been a significant increase in the number of people in slavery, up to about, we believe, 27 million people in slavery today. And that's defining it very strictly. People controlled by violence, unable to walk away, being economically exploited and paid absolutely nothing. In other words, well, slavery as it's always been.
As it's always been. Where do they tend to be concentrated, if they are in fact concentrated? And are there places where there aren't slaves?
Well, there must be some places where there aren't slaves, but they're very hard to find. Certainly there's a lot of slavery in the United States and in Western Europe and those places where it exists in fewer numbers. I don't know of a case in Iceland, but virtually every other country in the world we know has cases of slavery. The largest number of people in slavery are in South Asia, India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh. There's been a long historical concentration there of people in what's called hereditary collateral debt bondage. It's a kind of slavery that masquerades as a system of loan or debt, but in fact it's real slavery. There are then concentrations in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Burma, West and North Africa. But as I say, every country in the world really has some slavery.
And that includes the United States.
In the United States, to the best of our reckoning, and very conservatively, we'd say there are probably 40 to 50,000 people in slavery today.
And are they concentrated by region, or are they pretty much all over?
They tend to be in the largest numbers around the edges of the country. So east and west coast and along the southern edge. Fewer in the Dakotas and Nebraska and the big middle. But there have been human trafficking and slavery cases in every United States state.
Explain to us, relatively speaking, the slavery problem today versus the slavery problem during the height of the transatlantic slave trade.
The slavery today is in many respects identical in that the complete control of a human being, their exploitation, the brutality and violence that's visited upon them, the sexual abuse that will be visited upon any woman who is enslaved in any type of slavery around the world. Those things remain the same. But there are also some critical differences. One is that obviously it's illegal everywhere, so it has become a hidden crime. You can't see it nearly so easily as you would have been able to do at the time of the transatlantic trade. But secondly, and really in a more profound way, because of the glut of potential slaves on the world market, the potential slaves, that is the number of people who are living in extreme vulnerability and without protections of the rule of law, it means that the total number of slaves is higher at the same time that their availability has driven down the price. So slaves are cheaper today than at any time in history. And it means that they've gone from being the capital purchase items that they were in the antebellum South, when a slave cost as much as a house, to today when the average slave costs about $90.
Unbelievable. And what has caused the price to drop so much? And then describe to us how this makes virtually everyone who is a slave essentially disposable.
Well, the fall in price results from the fact that around the world, and especially in the developing world, the number of people who are in extreme deprivation and lacking protections and who are very vulnerable has increased exponentially. And interestingly, today people are not kidnapped or knocked over the head and dragged into slavery as you might think. Almost everyone who comes into slavery for the first time today comes into slavery because someone asked them a simple question, which is, would you like a job? People are desperate to find money to feed their kids or get medicine for their partners or to have some kind of a decent life. That question is asked. I've been told that story by people in slavery around the world, that someone came into their village or neighborhood or barrio and said, who'd like a job? And they say to me, I looked at that man and he looked like a crook, but my children were hungry or my wife was sick and I had to do something. And so they climb in the back of the truck or they walk off, and within days or weeks they find out there's no job, it's slavery, but they're so far away from their family and support system they can't get out. The cost of just tricking people into slavery on the basis of their desperation is so low that the slaveholder has no incentive to maintain that person as a healthy, productive person. It's easier, they're so inexpensive to procure that it's very easy to just think of them as styrofoam cups or plastic pens. You get them, you use them hard, you use them up, and if they break, get sick, whatever, you throw them away, crush them, or kill them. And around the world, we find that slaves are simply disposable. And that's a kind of chilling hallmark of the nature of contemporary slavery.
Well, you have spent a good part of your career, especially more recently, trying to address this problem and, more importantly, to end it. And it seems from reading your books and other publications that you believe that we're now at a critical point when we possibly could end this problem once and for all. How would we go about that? And I know you can't explain in just a few minutes, but just maybe the high points, and then let's talk about what the prospects are for raising the priority of this issue under the Obama administration.
Absolutely. How we go about that involves a whole series of different strategies. I mean, as I began to investigate how to deal with the problem, I discovered that there is no silver bullet, but really there's a box of silver bullets, and that you have to pick the right one for the right country, culture, type of slavery, economic situation, and so forth. But it has two or three common themes. One is community organizing. The most powerful way that we've discovered to bring people out of slavery in large numbers is for them to organize within their communities with outside support and protection, and then you see radical, rapid change. A second is to bring corporations and businesses and industries into the equation. All slavery is economic. A lot of slave-made goods flow into our lives and into our homes. None of us want these, but it takes a coalition, as it were, of consumers, anti-slavery groups, and industries to police those product chains and remove slavery. It's also about altering some of the fundamental laws that we have, both internationally and nationally, to take the open doors that we have for slaveholders and shut them. An H-visa system, which started off as a good idea in many ways, is never policed in our country. And it means that those who wish to enslave workers on farms, for example, can do so without knowing that no one's going to come and check up on them. We've got to make sure those open doors are, if not shut, with sufficient inspection that we're able to follow it through. And then the toughest is about cultural change. You know, there are countries like Japan where, sadly, there is a willingness to denigrate foreign-born women, a very sexist approach to those women and their sexual exploitation. Racism becomes into it. And I've tried working with the Japanese government, but it's very difficult that Japanese men, almost to a man, find it hard to change their viewpoint on women who are not Japanese and to treat them as full human beings with dignity. Cultural change takes time. I grew up in the Deep South and watched cultural change occur and the end of segregation. So I know it can happen, but I also know it can be hard work. And for some situations of slavery, it's going to take that kind of hard work.
Why don't we start at the top in the United States and discuss possibilities for change under the Obama administration? What do you think is possible? Do you think that this could be raised to the level of emphasis that it deserves, in your opinion? Is this the right time?
I hope so, and I do think it's the right time. And I appreciate that there are, I and I suppose 200 or 300 other million Americans are also having great hopes about their particular concerns and issues with President Obama. But that said, I know that we could do so much more without an enormous amount of resource. It would all be about putting the effort and the thought to it. Here's a simple example. Today, Brazil is undoubtedly the world's leader in anti-slavery work as a national government. President Lula, within days of his taking office, after he was first elected, appointed a national commission for the eradication of slavery in Brazil. Well, they knew they have slavery in Brazil. We know we have slavery in the United States. The amount of slavery in Brazil may be double that of the United States, but it's within the same magnitude. And yet, in Brazil, they bring between 4,000 and 6,000 people out of slavery every year through the efforts of their federal government. Our government brings to freedom 300 or 400 people a year. And we have more police. We have more money in law enforcement. We have the potential to do much better than the Brazilians do. But we don't have that political will of the appointment of a commission or the appointment of special law enforcement squads that are assigned only to slavery. Those two things alone would make an enormous difference in this country. But there are a number of anti-slavery groups that have put forward 20, 30 points of things that could be fairly easy fixes in the Obama administration and lead to very dramatic change in the reduction of slavery.
What would be 2 or 3 of the most important things the Obama administration could do that would greatly accelerate the resolution of this problem?
Well, one that does have a cost implication, but not a great cost implication, is the training of police. We have about 20,000 police departments in the United States. Only, as far as I can tell, and this is checking with the Justice Department, only 5 of them have anyone trained and assigned full-time to human trafficking and slavery. Only 5. There are other things that happen at the federal level, but this is at the local police level. I know from experience of traveling all over the country that many police have had no training whatsoever on human trafficking and slavery. That they confront situations that once you talk to them, it emerges that in fact they've been watching slavery right under their noses, but not knowing how to recognize it and not knowing how to collect evidence and lead it to a prosecution. Police training would go an enormously long way to both eradicating it and also making it much more risky for the people who enslave others. And if we raise that risk, we also raise their costs. If we raise their costs, we can potentially drive them out of the business of slavery because they're only in it to make the money. They're not doing it just to be mean to people.
What else might we do in addition to that? Maybe if you take it down to the grassroots level, is there something that people could be doing in communities such as ours that could be helpful?
Yes. In some ways, what I just described for police applies to the average citizen. I was amazed when, as part of a piece of research for the United Nations, I discovered that about 1/3 of the people who come to freedom in the United States each year come to the freedom because they were helped to it by a good Samaritan, an average citizen. A citizen who saw something wrong and thought, I don't know what that is, but let me do something about it.
What about taking it down another level? Because here at the university, we've had a focus on human trafficking for many years, and it seems that with each passing year, more and more students are interested and motivated and appalled and want to learn more about this issue and what they can do about it. And it seems to me that the sooner you can get young people engaged, not just with this issue, but with any issue, the more opportunities you'll have to widen the discussion. So how early is too early to acquaint students with I mean, it's a horrifying issue on the one hand, and we don't want to scare them, but I think in an appropriate context, any issue can be constructive.
Absolutely. And I have to say, I have felt absolutely comfortable taking this issue to 10 and 11-year-olds. I don't think you can go younger than that, except in a way that deals primarily with historical slavery and Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln and so forth. But leaving out the most horrific instances of this, you can begin to show this to 10 and 11-year-olds. And certainly at the middle school level, the 12, 13, 14-year-olds, we find that they are perfectly receptive to this issue. In fact, more so than most adults and more so than most university students. We now reach out into middle schools and find that the students just catch on fire and do amazing things in terms of outreach, public education, fundraising, and even often the linkages of partnerships with schools for freed slave children in other countries. I've been astounded by what middle school kids are doing as compared to what adults usually do.
In the university environment, what would you recommend to expand the emphasis on this topic? Obviously, I'm assuming you would be interested in developing curricular programs that would incorporate this in a significant way, but how might we move in that direction without jumping immediately toward a degree program or something similar?
Well, yes, I would love to see degree programs and postgraduate degrees. And I have to say, as a person who's spent most of my career as a university professor and who have established postgraduate degree programs, I'm amazed that there isn't a strong one in a United States university at this time. Because I tour universities constantly speaking about this, I can tell you there's a big market. There's a lot of students who want that postgraduate training and can't find it. But of course, you have to build up to that. You have to start with individual classes. There are a lot of classes now that consider this as part of the curriculum, individual courses, some dedicated courses. I teach on or am a visiting lecturer in a number of those around the country, but there's not a lot of them. But those also need to be built up into certificate programs and then into further postgraduate programs or undergraduate programs. I'm a visiting professor, not full-time, but a regular appointed visiting professor at Hull University in Great Britain within something called the Wilberforce Institute for the Study of Slavery and Emancipation. And there we offer a master's degree in slavery studies, contemporary slavery studies. It would be a natural fit for law enforcement for obvious reasons, but also given the significant rehabilitative role needed in any work to do with people in slavery and victims of human trafficking. It would link to medicine, nursing, biological sciences, psychology, and so forth. Slavery is an economic activity, and that feeds into criminology, economics, microfinance, and so forth. There's a development side to this. It actually goes on. And then to think as well about the specific and horrific realities of the lived experience of women who are enslaved, it clearly fits into women's studies as well.
So this issue is by definition interdisciplinary, and it needs that kind of response.
Though I also think there's a core subdiscipline here, which is about studying the nature of a relationship in which people are completely controlled one by another, and how that fits economically, culturally, psychologically. There's so many dimensions to it.
Now, in your book, Ending Slavery, you've actually set out a time frame for the termination of this problem. Tell us what that is and how you picked that time frame.
Well, in the book, I don't hammer away and say we have a precise 25-year plan. But I have to say our communications director said you need to put a number to it to make it very clear to people. If everything worked according to plan, what I set out in that book is that we would be able to reduce the slavery in the world to a tiny fraction of its current level within 25 years. Now that would mean the Obama administration and other governments making some kind of priority decision about this, about the amount of resource flowing to it. But the thing that I think is most hopeful is that when I began to calculate what would be the cost of helping 27 million people come out of slavery and into freedom, I was shocked by how small it was. The best estimate that we were able to come to, based on the average costs of several thousand situations in our own experience of helping people from slavery to autonomous lives of dignity and citizenship, was that there's a global average of about $400 to achieve that. In the United States, it goes up to more like $30,000 to $40,000 because things are expensive here, medical care and legal care and so forth. But in parts of the world where it's very inexpensive to live, like northern India, it can be as little as $120, $150. The point is that if you multiply up according to how many people are in rich and poor countries who are in slavery, the total comes to just over $12 billion. And that's about what Americans spend on blue jeans in a year. That's about what Americans spend on going to the movies in a year. That's what Americans spend on organic food in a year. It's not a lot of money. And when you compare it, for example, to the request a few days ago for $350 billion by the president to Congress to help restart the economy, it's chicken feed. And it's not even a cost that you would have in a single year. It's what's estimated over something like a 25-year period. So we're actually talking about a much smaller amount, and again, not one that would have to be carried by the United States. I'll tell you a story that really moved me once. I said, as a kind of crazy supposition to start a conversation, let's imagine the city of Seattle, who are about to spend that much money on their new light rail system, right? Let's imagine that they decided, we'll skip the light rail for now. Instead, we'll float a bond issue for the same amount, and our gift to the world will be an end in slavery. We'll raise that money, and Seattle will give the end of slavery to the rest of the world. I said that in front of someone who is in fact working for a foundation that holds a lot more money than that. And he stopped me afterwards and he said, we could guarantee that bond. And then I began to realize this is actually possible.
So it is possible. I guess the next question would be, do you think it will happen? Are you optimistic, or do you have reason to be more optimistic now than you would have been 10, 20 years ago?
Oh, I'm very much more optimistic now. Not least because in the process of doing the research to write that book, which didn't start off to be about ending slavery, it started off to be simply about liberation and rehabilitation. And in the process, I learned that ending slavery was possible. And I'm also very optimistic because around the world, in the projects that we work with and the partners that we work with, we see an exponential growth in the number of people coming to freedom from slavery. That as we expand programs, the number of people coming to freedom are dramatically expanded. We've now reached a point where we're about to begin a 5-year process of significant scale up, so that instead of working in 100 villages in Uttar Pradesh, we're going to be working in 1,500 villages in Uttar Pradesh, and attempting to demonstrate that a whole county, what they call a block in India, but a whole county-sized entity can be taken from slave-infested to slave-free in a 5 or 6 year period. And if we can do that, we can say, we can do this in the next block and the next block. And yeah, I'm very optimistic.
At the same time, it still sounds like a titanic effort, and I don't get the sense that there are too many organizations like yours around the world.
You're right. We're small in number. We are tough and smart. That's important. But it's also, interestingly, not our job to do this. Every country in the world has passed a law against slavery, and those laws are promises made by governments to their citizens that they will not have slavery in their country. We need to make sure that governments keep their promise to their own citizens. Now, it'll take a long time, it'll be very difficult for some countries to keep their promise. But there are countries that are rich and powerful and willing, or at least they say they're willing, that could do this very quickly. It doesn't have to be on the backs of abolitionists. It actually is the job of government, since they've already promised through passing laws that they're going to do this job.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Kevin Bales, for joining us today.
It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the Global Perspective Show. I'm John Bercia, and we'll see you next time.